The city had changed. Fast food chains had stolen his customers, and every night he locked the doors wondering if it would be the last time. But on a freezing winter night, just as despair threatened to consume him, he saw Thema, a homeless woman, and her son shivering on the sidewalk. In that moment, he realized he was still lucky, luckier than so many others out there. And with one simple act of kindness, everything began to change. The dim glow of the overhead lights barely illuminated the empty tables inside Oliver's kitchen, a small traditional eatery tucked into a quiet corner of the city. Outside, snowflakes drifted lazily through the frigid night air, settling in soft piles against the sidewalk. Marcus Oliver, the restaurant's owner and head chef, sat hunched over the counter, staring at the stack of bills in front of him, his hands, rough from years in the kitchen, clenched into fists as he scanned the numbers that had only seemed to grow over the past months. Rent overdue, utility bills piling up, supplier invoices unpaid. The weight of failure pressed against his chest, suffocating him. He exhaled slowly, rubbing his temples. This place wasn't just a business, it was his father's legacy, passed down to him with the hope that he would keep it alive. But things had changed. The city had changed. Fast food chains had crept in from every direction, luring customers away with cheap prices and quick service. He had watched as his once loyal patrons dwindled, replaced by silence and empty seats. He still had regulars, people who loved the warmth of homemade meals, the familiarity of his food. But it wasn't enough. It was never enough. Marcus sighed, pushing back his chair. It was late. He had spent the last few hours going over the numbers again, looking for a solution that didn't exist. He grabbed his coat, locked the front door, and stepped onto the icy sidewalk. The cold bit through his jacket, sending a shiver down his spine. He glanced up at the empty street, his breath visible in the crisp night air. Everything felt lifeless, drained of the energy that once made this neighborhood vibrant. As he turned to leave, movement caught his eye. Just a few feet away, curled against the brick wall of a closed convenience store, a woman and a young boy sat huddled together beneath a tattered blanket. The child, no older than 7, burrowed into his mother's side, his small frame trembling. The woman clutched the thin fabric tight around them, her eyes scanning the street with weary caution. Marcus stopped mid-step, his exhaustion momentarily forgotten. He had walked past countless homeless people before, but something about this scene struck him differently tonight. Maybe it was the way the boy clung to his mother, his small hands gripping her worn-out coat like she was the only thing keeping him safe. Maybe it was the quiet resignation in a woman's eyes, the kind of exhaustion that went beyond physical fatigue, a kind of hopelessness that settled deep into the soul. For a brief moment, Marcus thought about just walking away. He had his own problems, his restaurant was failing, his future was uncertain. He wasn't in a position to be helping anyone. But then a thought crept in, uninvited but undeniable. As bad as things were for him, he still had a place to go. He still had options. These two had nothing. His shoulders tensed as he debated with himself, but the decision had already been made before he even realized it. He turned back toward the woman and her son, his footsteps crunching against the frozen sidewalk as he approached. The woman tensed, her grip on the boy tightening, eyes narrowing in caution. "You don't have to be out here in this cold," Marcus said, keeping his voice even gentle. He gestured toward the restaurant behind him. "I own that place. I just closed up, but I can still make something hot for you. You and the kid can warm up inside." The woman's jaw tightened. Her fingers dug into the thin fabric of her coat as if bracing herself for another cruel joke, another empty promise. "We're fine," she muttered, her voice low and guarded. "We don't need charity." Marcus exhaled sharply, biting back frustration. He wasn't trying to make a statement, wasn't looking for gratitude. He just couldn't stomach the thought of walking away. But before he could say anything else, the little boy shifted, his face peeking out from beneath the blanket. His dark eyes, wide and filled with hunger, flickered between his mother and Marcus. "Mom," the boy whispered, his voice barely audible. "I'm cold." The woman's posture stiffened. For a long moment, she said nothing. Marcus could see the war inside her pride battling against the primal need to protect her child. Then, with a quiet sigh, her shoulders slumped. "All right," she murmured. "Just for a little while." Marcus nodded and led the way back to the restaurant. As he unlocked the door and flipped the lights back on, the warmth from inside spilled out, melting the chill clinging to his skin. The woman hesitated at the entrance, glancing around as if expecting a catch. But her son didn't wait, rushed inside, drawn by the promise of heat and food. Marcus watched as the boy rubbed his hands together, his small fingers still stiff from the cold. Something in Marcus's chest tightened. He motioned toward one of the booths near the heater. "Sit down. I'll get something ready." The woman pulled the blanket tighter round her shoulders but followed, settling into the seat across from her son. Marcus stepped into the kitchen, pushing up his sleeves. His movements were automatic, hopping, stirring, plating, but his mind was restless. By the time he placed the steaming bowls of soup in front of them, the little boy was practically bouncing in his seat. He grabbed his spoon and dug in immediately, slurping the broth with an enthusiasm that made Marcus smirk. The woman, however, was slower, more hesitant. She lifted the spoon to her lips, blew gently, and took a cautious sip. A long pause, then, almost reluctantly, she murmured, "That's good." Marcus exhaled, some of the tension in his chest easing. He leaned against the counter, watching as the boy devoured his food with unfiltered joy. For the first time that night, something inside him felt right. After they finished, Marcus wiped his hands on a dish towel and glanced toward the back of the restaurant. "There's a storage room in the back. It's got blankets, a couch. Not much, but it's warmer than out there." The woman's lips pressed into a thin line, her instinct to refuse fighting against the harsh reality of the night. But the boy was already looking up at her, hope flickering behind his exhaustion. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, then nodded. "Okay." Marcus turned away, rubbing the back of his neck. "All right," he muttered, trying to ignore the strange warmth settling in his chest. "I'll lock up." As he stepped outside again to secure the front door, the cold air hit him once more, but this time it didn't feel quite as sharp. The next morning, before the first light of dawn had broken through the darkened sky, Marcus Oliver trudged toward his restaurant, the bitter cold biting at his exposed hands. His body ached from another restless night spent tossing and turning, haunted by unpaid bills and the slow, inevitable collapse of everything he had built. His mind was already drowning in the same cycle of worry: how to pay rent, how to keep the lights on, how to survive another month. But as he reached the entrance of Oliver's kitchen, something made him stop mid-step. The glass windows, which had been smudged with dust and fingerprints the night before, were now spotless, reflecting the soft glow of the street lamp. His gaze drifted downward, and for the first time in weeks, the doormat was free of dirt and grime. His brow furrowed as he unlocked the door, stepping inside cautiously. The scent of cleaning solution and warm air filled the space. The tables, which had been left in disarray, were perfectly ranged. The floors, once dulled by the constant shuffle of feet, gleamed under the light. Even the counter, where stacks of unpaid bills had sat just hours ago, was wiped clean, organized into neat piles. His stomach tensed as he heard quiet shuffling from the back. He walked toward the storage room, his footsteps careful, and when he pushed the door open, he found Sophia and Noah kneeling on the floor, carefully folding a few leftover rags. The little boy was the first to notice him. Noah's face lit up, his dark curls bouncing as he jumped to his feet. "Look, we cleaned everything. It was Mom's idea. She said if we're staying, we should help." Sophia, who had been adjusting a folded towel in the makeshift bed of blankets, stiffened slightly. She stood slowly, brushing dust from her sleeves, and met Marcus's gaze with something close to defiance, like she was daring him to say something about it. Marcus's fingers twitched at his sides. He wasn't sure what to say. No one had ever done this for him. Beffareno customer, no friend, no one. He had been so used to carrying everything on his own shoulders, fighting against the tide alone, that he almost didn't know how to accept help. He glanced at the restaurant again, taking in the spotless surfaces, the faint scent of lemon in the air. His throat felt tight, but he forced out the words, "You didn't have to do this." Sophia shrugged, her voice steady but distant. "We know." Noah beamed up at him, rocking on his heels. "Did we do a good job?" Marcus exhaled, rubbing a hand over the back of his neck before giving a small nod. Yeah, kid. You did good." Noah's grin widened, his chest puffing up with pride, but Sophia's expression remained unreadable. Marcus had the strange sense that she wasn't used to hearing words of appreciation either. The moment stretched between them, heavy with things unspoken, but there wasn't time to linger on it. He had a restaurant to run. He shook himself, turning back toward the kitchen. "All right, I got to start prepping for today. You to make yourselves comfortable, I guess." He walked behind the counter, rolling up his sleeves. The morning prep routine was muscle memory at this point, pulling ingredients, chopping, seasoning, preparing for another day of uncertainty. Sophia and Noah lingered at the entrance of the kitchen, watching. It was the first time Marcus felt the weight of their presence in his space. He wasn't used to working under anyone's gaze. A few moments passed before Noah spoke up. "Can we help?" Marcus shook his head. "No need. Just take a seat. I'll fix you something before you head out." Sophia looked like she wanted to argue, but something in Marcus's tone made her stop. She simply nodded, taking Noah's hand and leading him to one of the booths near the heater. Marcus focused on the task at hand. It had been a long time since he cooked for someone who wasn't a paying customer. He opted for something simply a warm, hearty omelet with a side of toast and roasted potatoes. Something filling but easy on the stomach. The smell of butter and eggs sizzling on the pan filled the space, the familiar rhythm of cooking momentarily drowning out his thoughts. When he finally plated the food and brought it over, Noah practically vibrated with excitement. "Wow, it smells so good," the boy exclaimed, grabbing his fork before Marcus could even set the plate down. Sophia, on the other hand, remained composed, her movements careful as she picked up her fork and took a small bite. Marcus watched without meaning to, gauging her reaction. Noah was already devouring his food, humming in contentment between bites, but Sophia was slower. She chewed, considering, then set her fork down. Marcus caught the slight furrow of her brows, the way her fingers hovered over the plate as if mentally adjusting something in her head. "It's good," she said finally. "But," Marcus arched a brow, crossing his arms. "But," Sophia met his gaze unfazed, "the seasoning on the eggs is off. It's almost there, but it needs a sharper contrast. Maybe a little smoked paprika or cayenne to give it a deeper profile." Marcus blinked. Not what he was expecting. Most people would have just said thank you and left it at that. But Sophia spoke like someone who knew food, not just someone who ate it, but someone who understood it. He let out a quiet scoff. "You always critique free meals?" Sophia shrugged. "You asked." Marcus shook his head, but there was something like amusement tugging at the corner of his mouth. He shouldn't have been annoyed. He should have been irritated. But instead he found himself intrigued. "You cook?" he asked, half expecting her to brush the question off. Sophia hesitated, just for a second, but then her shoulders squared. "I used to." Something in her tone made Marcus pause. It wasn't just the past tense, it was the weight behind it, the quiet but undeniable bitterness. He studied her carefully. "Where?" Sophia's lips pressed into a thin line before she finally answered. "I was a head chef." Silence settled between them. Even Noah slowed his eating, glancing between them like he could feel the shift in the conversation. Marcus exhaled, running a hand down his face. "A head chef," he muttered, shaking his head slightly. "And you didn't think to mention that?" Sophia's gaze was steady. "Didn't seem relevant." Marcus barked out a dry laugh. "Didn't seem relevant? Lady, you just critiqued an omelet like a damn food critic." Sophia's expression remained unreadable, but there was the faintest flicker of something in her eyes, a memory. A past she hadn't spoken of in a long time. Marcus exhaled, rubbing his jaw. He shouldn't get involved. He had enough on his plate. But there was something here, something about her words, her presence, her knowledge that made him pause. Sophia studied him for a long moment, then spoke carefully. "Look, I know you're trying to keep this place running. I owe you for last night. Let me help, just until you figure things out." Marcus narrowed his eyes. "Why?" Sophia's expression softened, just barely. "Because you gave my son a warm place to sleep." The words hung in the air between them, heavy and unspoken. Marcus exhaled. His gut told him this was a bad idea, letting someone in, trusting a stranger. But his gut had also told him to give up on this restaurant months ago. And yet here he was, still fighting. Finally, he nodded once. "All right, let's see what you've got." The next few days blurred into a quiet but steady routine inside Oliver's kitchen. Marcus still woke up every morning with the same weight pressing down on his chest, still checked his finances and saw the same bleak numbers staring back at him, still fought the gnawing dread of wondering if this week would be the last. But something was different. Sophia was in the kitchen. At first, she worked silently, keeping her distance, moving with a kind of efficiency that only came from experience. She didn't ask unnecessary questions. She didn't overstep. When Marcus prepped for the day, she did the same. When he diced onions, she was already working on the garlic. When he tested a broth, she was adjusting the heat on another pot before he even had to say anything. It was seamless, the kind of rhythm that took years to build in a professional kitchen. And yet it settled between them like something that had always been there. The first time he saw her take charge of a dish, it was unspoken. He had been struggling again with a new recipe, something meant to bring in fresh customers, something that needed to stand out but kept falling flat. He had stared at the plated dish in frustration, tasting it, tweaking the seasoning, tasting again. Something was missing. He knew it, but he couldn't fix it. Sophia had been watching, and then, without a word, she stepped forward, took the spoon from his hand, and added just a pinch of something he hadn't even considered: smoked paprika, a hint of citrus zest. Then she slid the spoon back toward him. Taste. Marcus hesitated but took the bite. His jaw tensed as he let the flavor settle. It was better. Damn it, it was good. Sophia simply crossed her arms. You're overcomplicating it. Let the ingredients do the work. Marcus exhaled, staring at her for a long moment before shaking his head. You're annoyingly good at this. Sophia smirked, the first real hint of amusement he had seen from her since she walked through his doors. I know. Noah, who had been perched on a stool nearby, grinned as if he had just watched a magician perform a trick. Told you my mom was a real chef. And just like that, something shifted. Marcus still handled most of the cooking, but Sophia became his second set of eyes, his second set of hands. When he was stuck, she nudged him in the right direction. When something wasn't working, she said it outright. There was no ego, no hesitation, no sugarcoating, just food, getting it right, making it better. And for the first time in a long time, Marcus didn't feel like he was drowning alone. By the end of the week, they had something real: a completely revamped menu, modern but true to its roots, full of bold, comforting flavors that stood out. But food alone wasn't enough. They needed people to notice. They needed customers. So on Saturday morning, while the city was still waking up, they put the next part of their plan into motion. Marcus rolled out a cart to the front of the restaurant, placing freshly plated samples of their new dishes on display. The air filled with the scent of sizzling spices, slow-cooked meats, the warmth of fresh bread. The goal was simple: get people to taste it. If they liked it, they'd come back. Noah was practically vibrating with excitement. Can I help? Marcus smirked. You good talking to strangers, kid? Noah grinned. I talk to everyone. Sophia, who had been adjusting the plating on one of the samples, arched a brow. He really does. Marcus shook his head, but handed Noah a small tray of bite-sized portions. All right, little salesman. Let's see what you've got. And Noah took his job very seriously. He approached anyone walking by with a bright smile, offering samples like he had been running restaurants his whole life. Some people ignored him, but most stopped because there was something irresistible about a kid with too much enthusiasm. And a plate of free food. They took a bite. They paused. They looked toward the restaurant. And just like that, curiosity turned into something more. Sophia wasn't idle either. While Marcus handled the kitchen, she was outside, talking to people, explaining the new menu, drawing them in with confidence that only a seasoned chef could have. And then there were the homeless people. Sophia had been the one to suggest if they were offering free samples, why not take a few meals to the ones who needed them most? Marcus hadn't hesitated. He packed up warm meals, real portions, not scraps, and Sophia and Noah walked down the block, handing them out to the people curled up in alleyways, sitting on sidewalks, the ones nobody else saw. They didn't ask for anything in return. They just gave. And something unexpected happened. Word spread, not just about the food, but about what the restaurant was doing. People started showing up, not just the regulars, not just the curious passersby, but new faces, drawn in by more than just a good meal. By mid-afternoon, the tables inside were full for the first time in weeks. Marcus barely had time to stop and breathe as orders kept coming in, plates flying out of the kitchen, voices filling the space in a way that reminded him of what this place used to be. At one point in the chaos of it all, he caught Sophia's gaze from across the kitchen. She was moving just as fast as he was, her hands steady, her focus sharp. But there was something else there, a flicker of something deeper, something familiar. She had done this before. She had been here before. And for the first time since she had stepped into his restaurant, she looked like she belonged. Marcus smirked, wiping sweat from his brow. Not bad, chef. Sophia didn't look up from the dish she was plating, but he caught the way her lips curved just slightly at the title. By the time the sun dipped below the skyline, Oliver's Kitchen had a waiting list. A month had passed, and Oliver's Kitchen was no longer on the brink of collapse. What had started as a desperate attempt to survive had turned into something else entirely: a revival, a transformation. The new menu had taken off. Word had spread faster than Marcus could have imagined. And now there were days when the restaurant was packed from open to close, the line stretching out the door. Customers returned not just for the food, but for the warmth of the place. The energy that buzzed through the air, the feeling that they were part of something bigger. Marcus still had his worries. He still checked the numbers every night, still ran through expenses in his head before falling asleep. But for the first time in a long, long time, the numbers weren't just red ink and overdue notices. They were growing. Sophia had become the backbone of the kitchen. It happened so naturally that Marcus wasn't even sure when the shift occurred. Maybe it was the first time she corrected his plating before he could protest. Maybe it was when she started finishing his sentences mid-order, anticipating what he needed before he even said it. Maybe it was when he realized that in all the chaos of a dinner rush, he wasn't alone anymore. And then one night, after the last table had been cleared, after the last plate had been scrubbed clean, Marcus leaned against the counter, watching Sophia wipe down the stove. She didn't glance up, didn't break her rhythm. He exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "You should be my head chef." Sophia stilled. Her hands, which had been moving with their usual efficiency, stopped mid-motion. Slowly, she turned to face him. Her eyes flickered with something unreadable. Marcus shrugged like it wasn't a big deal, even though it was. "You're already running the damn kitchen anyway. Might as well make it official." For a moment, Sophia didn't say anything. The air between them was thick, heavy with something unspoken, something old. Then she swallowed, her fingers tightening slightly around the rag in her hand. "You sure about that?" Marcus let out a quiet laugh, shaking his head. "I'd be an idiot if I wasn't." Sophia studied him for a long moment before exhaling, a sound so quiet that it was almost lost beneath the hum of the empty restaurant. Then, finally, she nodded. Noah, who had been sitting on a stool at the counter, looked between them with wide eyes before breaking into a grin. "That means we get to stay, right?" Marcus's chest tightened. He hadn't thought about it in those exact words, but the answer was obvious. Of course they were staying. "Yeah, kid," he muttered, ruffling Noah's curls. "You're stuck with me now." Sophia rolled her eyes, but for the first time since she walked into his restaurant, she looked like she belonged. That night, after Sophia and Noah had gone to the back to settle in, Marcus didn't go home right away. Instead, he grabbed his jacket, stepped out into the cold night air, and walked 3 blocks down to an old apartment complex, one of the few still renting at a decent price. He had made a few calls that morning, talked to a guy he knew, worked out the details. The place wasn't much, a small 1-bedroom with a decent kitchen and a warm heater, but it was theirs, if they wanted it. When he told Sophia the next day, she didn't respond right away. She just stood there, staring at him, expression unreadable. Then, after what felt like an eternity, she nodded once, slow and deliberate. "You don't have to," she started. "I know," Marcus interrupted, "but I want to." Sophia didn't thank him, not in words, but when she walked back into the kitchen that morning, there was a different kind of weight to the way she carried herself, a quiet acceptance that maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to run anymore. And just like that, Oliver's Kitchen wasn't just Marcus's restaurant anymore. It was theirs. It was a home. On the first Saturday morning after the new menu launched, Marcus unlocked the doors not just for paying customers, but for the people who had no place else to go. It had started as a simple idea. Sophia's idea, actually. She had known what it was like to sit on the other side of that door, watching people pass by, stomach empty, cold sinking into her bones. And Marcus, he had known what it was like to almost lose everything, to fight for something that felt impossible to hold on to. So every Saturday morning, before the first order of the day, Oliver's Kitchen served free meals to the people who needed them most. There was no catch, no requirements, just a warm plate, a chair, a moment of dignity. At first, it was just a handful of people, the ones Sophia and Noah had met when they were still on the streets. But then, week after week, more showed up. Some of them never said a word, just ate in silence. Some of them stayed, talked, shared stories. Some of them, like Sophia once had, looked at the food in front of them like it was the first real meal they had in years. Noah made it his job to hand out trays, his small hands carrying plates with the kind of purpose most adults could only dream of. Sophia, even in the chaos of the kitchen, made sure every dish was plated right, because it mattered. Because these meals weren't just charity, they were a reminder that people still cared. One morning, a woman came in, shoulders hunched, her arms wrapped around a little girl who couldn't have been more than 5. She didn't speak much, barely met anyone's eyes, but when she sat down, when she took that first bite, something in her face cracked. Just for a moment, Sophia saw her, and for the first time since this whole thing began, she left the kitchen, walked over, and sat down across from the woman. She didn't say much, just slid a napkin across the table, nodded, and stayed. And Marcus saw it then, really saw it what they were building. This wasn't just a business anymore. It wasn't just about surviving. It was about something bigger, something that mattered. And maybe, just maybe, Oliver's kitchen was never meant to be just his to begin with. Years passed, and Oliver's kitchen became more than just a restaurant. It became a beacon in the community. The Saturday morning meals for the homeless expanded into a full program, offering not just food but resources, connections, and sometimes even employment opportunities. Sophia's culinary expertise and Marcus's business sense created a thriving establishment that never forgot its roots. Noah grew from that shivering boy on the sidewalk into a confident young man who knew every regular by name and could anticipate their orders before they spoke. The storage room that once served as their shelter had been transformed into a community space where people gathered to share stories, find support, and sometimes just escape the cold. One winter evening, as snow fell softly outside, Marcus stood at the entrance of his restaurant, watching the busy dining room. The tables were full, laughter filled the air, and in the kitchen, Sophia orchestrated her team with the precision of a maestro. His eyes drifted to a particular corner booth where a young mother and her daughter, the same ones, Sophia had approached that day, were now regular volunteers, helping others who arrived with the same fear and uncertainty in their eyes. What had begun as a single act of kindness on a desperate night had created ripples that continued to spread, touching lives in ways Marcus could never have imagined. He realized that sometimes, when we're at our lowest point, the path forward isn't found in focusing on our own problems, but in extending a hand to someone who needs it even more. As Marcus turned to join Sophia in the kitchen, he caught sight of a family outside, hesitating at the window, their faces illuminated by the warm glow from within. Without a moment's hesitation, he opened the door and welcomed them in from the cold. Join us at Whispers of the Soul to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy. Together, let's spread kindness, one story at a time.